Hey everybody, we're back and we're live here with our last session on the Friday here of the West Virginia Cybersecurity Expo. We are here with Trey Balser, who's going to talk to us about some nice basic things you can do to secure your home business or your small business. And I'm willing to bet, Trey, they also would apply to an individual as well, correct?
That's
So
correct.
I'll let you go ahead and take over, and Scott and I will gladly help you out there as we go through too, if you like.
Okay,
We'll throw in a color commentary. How about that?
that's fine with me.
Oh.
So my name is Trey Balser, and I'm going to talk about securing small business today and partially tomorrow as well. So I'll just go ahead and get started. The first focus I wanted to do was the three major security controls that need attention when you are a IT administrator or even a business owner for small business, and this is scalable to medium-sized and large. So there's three security controls: physical, administrative, and technical. In regards to physical, there's a couple focuses that you want to do, and that's to keep it on lockdown, keep an eye on it and prevent further destruction. So when it comes to keeping it on lockdown, that's in regards to making sure that your wiring closets, data closets are locked unless you are actively using them. If someone walks in, have them use a check-in sign-in sheet so that you have a written record of who has been in that room. Because oftentimes those rooms are left unlocked, or the data racks itself don't have a lock on them. So end users or anyone around can walk in, start messing with the cables and plugging in whatever they want. And to me, that's a security risk because you can easily have man-in-the-middle attacks, rogue access points, and etc. So definitely don't want that just to be opened up. The next thing is to keep an eye on it. You kind of want to make sure that it's under surveillance 24/7. Keep a security camera either inside the closet or at the door, so you know who is entering and leaving, even if they don't use that sign-in check-in sheet. Of course, sunglasses and a hat, it's hard to identify somebody. So definitely want to make sure that if someone is going into that room, that someone from the IT staff or, someone with authority can walk them through those closets. And then prevent further destruction kind of goes in tail with making sure that if a fire breaks out, electricity fire, equipment catches on fire, that you can use a proper suppression system to put out that fire in a reasonable amount of time. You don't want to cause more destruction by using sprinklers or any kind of like fire extinguisher that you find. It has to be a certain kind. That way that you can try to minimize the damage as quickly as possible. Yeah, the fire will probably damage a good portion of your rack or your equipment, but that is replaceable, and the price goes way down when you use the proper fire prevention and stuff like that. So those are the kind of like physical controls that you can easily do for your environment that would help secure it more properly. Here's some of the examples. They have turnstiles to make sure that only those who have access can get through. That also goes along with man traps, making sure no one's piggybacking or tailgating into a room. Then there's also the fire suppression system over to the middle. That would be one that you would want to keep in if you have a data center, wiring closet, or anything of the such. Especially for your servers environments and stuff like that. You don't want to have, if you have the possibility to move it, you can, but you don't want to have water pipes and stuff directly above your electrical equipment, because that just tempts a lot of destruction. So if the water line were to bust, you could probably be down for a week or two, or however long it takes you to replace the equipment and rebuild, re-image and stuff like that. And you have the risk of having a lot of data loss. So, and then on the right is just a simple lock, keeping it on the rack. They have them for a reason. It's usually because there are people that'll move around your patch panels or unplug things to plug in their own items and end up taking you down. Then there's also the RFID security cards. And this one also has a pin pad on the far left. So that could be a good use. You could use one or both of the options. Definitely, I would have some type of policy so you can't share RFID cards to other people. And if you do use the pin pad, I recommend using more than just 4 digits, but I wouldn't do too many because it'll be hard to remember. And if you make it difficult to remember, then they'll most likely write it down somewhere. And you'd probably need to rotate that code on a monthly basis or a few months or, somewhat frequent, so no one can share that code to someone outside of those who need to use it, like IT administrators.
I had a student that showed me a picture where it was someone's front door and they had one of those pin pads, and he goes, "Can you guess the combination?" Because numbers were completely worn off. So another good reason is to change that number so like your numbers don't get worn and clearly show that that's a number in the midst of the combination.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend replacing the pin pad after so long, or at least scratch out the rest of the numbers so they all look beat up. Keep it all uniform of some sort. So the next security control that I kind of want to go over is administrative control. And to me, it's the least favorite, but also one of the most important things. And it is policies and procedures. So, in an environment, you need to make sure that the rules are clearly outlined for your end users, and even your administrative staff need some form of control. So policies, if so-and-so breaks this rule, this is the issue that will be warranted. Then there's the procedures and guidelines. If there is an outage or downtime, or if they have to go to a certain system for certain reasons, then you would have a clear depiction of what those policies and procedures would be, or guidelines. You kind of want to have it outlined so the person behind you can replicate what you did, or kind of have it performed in a timely manner. If someone's going to have a downtime, it will make it so much easier to have that go ahead, have that completely lined out. And then they won't have to worry about guessing on how to do something. And then the downtime becomes from 30 minutes to an hour to 4.5 hours or more. And then end users, they kind of need to have end user training when it comes to security. And I'm sure that was either covered in a previous session, or is just common sense almost. A lot of people don't think about security first, and IT is also to blame for this. So it's nice to have written acceptable use policies saying the do's and don'ts when you use IT equipment. Make sure that they're properly trained on the equipment. Advise them not to write down passwords. Have a good password policy in place, and the different suches. But it'll definitely help the flow of things, and it'll also train users to be wary of anyone who just sends an email saying it's urgent. There's a big push for phishing attacks right now, trying to keep them from compromising institutions, especially with the election going on. It's more common, and definitely with this crazy 2020 year, you never know when someone's going to try to compromise your private information. So the last one I kind of want to talk about is technical control. This is a very wide subject that can go a lot of different ways when it comes to security, and kind of summed it up in 4 points, but I'm sure there's more. You can probably talk about this for hours. But so the first thing is encrypt. I recommend having any laptop or tablet or anything that is somewhat mobile to be encrypted. It wouldn't hurt to have every device encrypted to a point. You just want to make sure that it doesn't get bogged down to the point where you can't use it. Encryption makes it more difficult for the attacker or disgruntled employee or anything trying to get into that device. It'll keep them from being able to see your information in plain text. So that is a definite plus when it comes to security. The next thing is the protect. Make sure that you have firewalls in place, antivirus, access control, VLANs. Just try to keep everything segmented. You want to make sure that no one has full rights to everything. Only give them the proper access to that they need to do their job. You don't want to give them too much or too little. So, and that would also kind of go back into administrative control, kind of like separating the job duties and making sure that, people in marketing, their jobs are clearly defined. Then scanning is a big technical control, making sure that, using intrusion detection systems or intrusion prevention systems, making sure that nothing crazy is going on in your network, becoming more familiar with your network. It's definitely difficult to tell what the baseline is for a company if you're an outsider, but it's a lot easier when you are constantly monitoring your network and you have the previous logs to show. So if you see a spike in, packets coming from a single computer, you might think that might be compromised, that might have malware on it. So that's definitely a big focus you want to do, and we'll actually go into that a little bit further. Then the last one's quarantine, which we definitely want to quarantine off or segment a device if you think it's compromised or if you think it has some type of malware. That should also be administrative, like some type of policy or guideline procedure to tell you, hey, this device is showing some bad signs. We want to take it off the network. We want to segment it off where it's in its own VLAN, or even if it's too far spread, I would recommend even turning off the switch, unplugging things, anything to get that device off your network. The quicker the response time, the better. It'll definitely help prevent being compromised. So, and that would also go with scanning. If you know that a device at 2 a.m. isn't supposed to send any kind of information over the network, then there's a good chance that either A, someone snuck in and is doing some homework, or B, there might be viruses on that computer and it may be passing off confidential information. So figuring out what's on your network is a big concern. So there's the general walkthrough, which kind of lets you go through physically and see if there are any devices or nodes that you see unfamiliar to you. If you pass a hallway or pass a computer workstation area and there is a access point just tucked underneath the desk, you kind of think that either the user plugged that in thinking that they could give themselves Wi-Fi, or you could be in the middle of an attack. They could do a rogue access point and hijack some of your traffic. So there's also the scanning of your network. This kind of goes into figuring out what exactly is on your network. If you can't find it physically, there's a good chance you can hit it with a ping or an ICMP packet of some sort and see if there's a node that you are familiar with, that you're not familiar with. It'll definitely help if you know that the different IP address ranges that you have. And then lastly, mapping your network. You kind of want to make sure that you have a good written document showing your major devices like servers, networking equipment, routers, switches, access points. You can document your workstations, but depending on the size of your business, it might become too much of a task or become too much clutter. So the next thing, we're going to go into scanning a little bit more just by showing you some of the applications that we use. This is probably the simplest one that any IT administrator, even someone not familiar with IT, can run Angry IP Scanner. So this basically sends out ping packets across a certain IP range, and it'll tell you how quickly it got there, what the host name is, and what ports they can see or detect on that device. Sometimes it won't show too much information. Sometimes it'll hit something, but it won't give you host names or pings or any kind of like descriptions. And that's usually because the firewall is filtering out the packet. To go into a little bit more depth about scanning your network, you could use Nmap, which is one of the most common and recommended tools to learn when going down the security track. It is basically the name of the device or the name of the tool is. It's a network mapper. You can scan IP ranges or individual hosts to see one, if it is alive on the network, if there's a certain port or certain ports open that you didn't know was running, or if you wanted to see if there were any vulnerable services running in the background. So on the screenshot here, you kind of have you have one host or 1 to 20 hosts. So it'll scan those 20 devices. If it hits, it'll show you the information down below. So this is hitting 192.168.0.1. And it's kind of showing you that you have port 80, 443, and a couple other ones opened up. If, say, Telnet and SSH was being ran, you want to make sure that Telnet, because it's not a secure means of a service, you want to make sure that is shut off and use the more secure version, which is SSH. So the next thing is Zenmap, which is, some people don't feel comfortable running off of a command line, which sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. So Zenmap is basically the GUI or graphical user interface version of Nmap. So you can do the exact same thing as Nmap, but it kind of gives you a little bit more information because it can also outline the topologies and try to tell you a little bit about your network. It's not the prettiest, but it'll also give you a general idea of what's going on, and you can toggle between different hosts so there's not as much noise in the one text document. So Nmap can also do a couple different things. Like normally by default, it'll do a ping scan, which is using ICMP packets. But if, say, the device you're trying to scan is not accepting those kind of form of packets, you can actually go and do TCP or UDP or use a different protocol and see if those kind of packets can hit the device. So just because it doesn't respond to a ping doesn't mean that the device exists or doesn't exist or that it's turned off. So from your findings, you want to take all the scans and all the different information that you gathered and kind of create a topology. There's a few different ways you can do it, and actually there's several different ways you can do it. But generally speaking, you want to document the devices you have on your network. And again, you can choose exactly what you want to put on there. If you're a network administrator, you might only focus on networking. If you're a server administrator, you might just care about how your applications are hosted on a device. If you really want to be thorough, I recommend doing servers, networking equipment, and workstations if you have the time and the willpower. So document the devices you have, record their names, their operating systems, what kind of connections, what port they're in. If they're in gig 01 or 101, I would note that. If it's in a certain VLAN, or these general computers should be in something like VLAN 10 for accounting, then that would be a good note to put in there. If there's any kind of weird configurations that you might not want to, permanently set into your memory, it's definitely worth putting brief notes in there so that either you or the next guy behind you can actually tell that there's something unique about your network. Like certain workstations might be hosting a web server, or certain workstations have a public IP address directly NATed, like a 1-to-1 NAT. So those things you would probably like to note down and make sure that the topology covers that. There's also two types of topologies if you want to get into it. There's the physical and then there's the logical. Physical topologies are more of where they are at in the building or in the buildings. if they're in wire closet A or wire closet B, or however you guys want to name it. That's usually a good way to track down devices quickly in case of a compromise or incident. If the device goes down, or if you know that malware of some sort is on that device and you want to get to it quickly, having a physical topology would be great. Logical topologies are more of like IP addressing, host names, and iOS versions and such like that. Both are great to have, and topologies are only as good as the updates that you give them, because one workstation getting replaced or one access point will potentially change the topology. And if you don't change it for a couple years, then your network might look completely different.
It's also pretty good to go out there and check those things and make sure you don't have any funny business, like looking and going, oh, I didn't know that was available. Because if you can do that, so can a hacker, right? So you should be auditing yourself to make sure if they audit you without your permission, you know what ports you have open and you can expect what's coming.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, it's best to be prepared, and having the topologies in an incident or crisis like that will help your response time greatly. You might not know that there's applications on a certain computer that if it goes down, you have to know the licensing information to install. It's also nice to know how endpoints will communicate. You don't know if the computer next to you in the same department is even going to the same switch. So if that person's having issues connecting, but the other person isn't, you're going to assume it's the computer, but it might be the switch in the closet. It's just hard to tell without a topology. Here's some applications for topologies. The top left one, which is actually one that you can, it's a completely Cisco simulator. It's a packet tracer, and it has came a long way over the years, and it is a great tool. You can put in notes per device, and some people use it for straight up topologies, especially if they're doing networking. If they don't have certain capabilities in packet tracer, more on the security side, so those things you would probably have to note in the note section on the device. Then on the top right is another free application. It is LibreDraw, part of the Office Libre, or that free version of what is close to being Microsoft Office. And then down at the bottom is actually the Office 365 version of Visio. And all of them are really great tools. I've used Visio quite a bit. It is the paid version, but it also has a lot of add-ins that you can use. So like Cisco Meraki has icons that you can throw in there. You can click on them and add the information to each device. So it's a pretty powerful tool, completely worth the money if you can spend it. If your network is small and you don't think Visio is worth it, then you can go the other free routes. SNMP applications are another way to be able to monitor your network greatly. SNMP stands for Simple Network Management Protocol, and it is used to see if nodes are active. For instance, on the top left is PRTG. It will have sensors installed on end devices or networking, routers, switches, firewalls, VPN tunnels, and depending on the type of node you put, it'll tell you whether or not it's healthy, it can respond to a certain way. So for instance, the one that is in the picture, it is having issues pinging on one of the alarms, so it's setting off. So as an IT administrator, you could see that easily, respond to it quickly, and kind of be of the more proactive approach than reactive, waiting for the end users to call and saying, hey, my computer's not working, or hey, I can't connect to the VPN. The bottom left is Nagios, which is a paid, there's a free version for a little bit, and then you have to end up paying. And then the bottom right is also one of the options that costs money, which is SolarWinds. These are it just depends on your network if you think you're going to need them. if you want a really good response time on outages and stuff, this is a great tool to use, completely worth the money, especially for managed service providers. You know, having in like level 1 or level 2 technicians monitor this can greatly increase response times, and it's not more of a, if a user calls in like saying, hey, I'm having problems, you kind of know it's happened already just by seeing the red or the yellow.
Trey, I also think that, and Scott can correct me here if I'm wrong, but I think going all the way back to NT4 back in the day, SMS actually, Microsoft's SMS was using SNMP, which later became System Center Configuration Manager, and these days you also have System Center Operations Manager, which is event viewer for the enterprise, much like SolarWinds, where you can go ahead and have an agent that'll phone home and basically tattletale on the machine about its health and issues it's having, that type of thing. So I think that you may have a bigger problem installing your agents on non-Microsoft devices, but I think SCOM can also facilitate that if for some reason you're a Microsoft only house.
Yeah, and there's several applications out there. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just going to mention Spiceworks. They're similar to SolarWinds, and anybody who knows me knows that I hate advertising. But Spiceworks is actually advertising supported, and it's very unobtrusive. But the features and everything that they have are amazing. And they'll go out and do inventories of your network and allow you to manage things with an SNMP console and things like that, but completely free. I mean, I think they have paid services too that maybe you can take out the ads or whatever, kind of like Hulu does. But anyway, it's a really good package if you've never seen it.
Yeah, and there's several applications like that depending on how much you want to pay for it, and automation becoming a growing thing, that if something is having issues like a VPN tunnel goes down, there's actually scripts that you can insert into these applications and automatically reset those services, so you don't even have to touch the issue, and then you just get a generated email saying the issue is over or it's completed, and you just move on to your own way. You can also have ticketing systems that'll completely close out the ticket and add the notes to it, and just again generate the email, so you don't have to worry about it. The end user knows that what exactly happened, and automation makes it completely hands-free. But so yeah, the next thing I want to kind of talk about is locking down the hosts. After you scan your network and you find out what devices you want to keep, because some things end users might have brought in, they might be using their mobile phones when they're not supposed to. So once you figure out what devices you want to keep on your network, you want to make sure that they're up to date, or if they don't accept any more updates, you want to upgrade them to the next operating system or replace them. So for instance, Windows 7 being end of life in January of this year, that seems forever ago, but basically if you still have Windows 7 on your network, you might want to start looking into getting it to Windows 10, making sure it's completely patched. That way, if someone tries to get on your network and sees those devices, they can't compromise you. If some devices cannot be supported by Windows 10, or whatever operating system you use, Linux or Macintosh, you want to make sure the hardware is supported and it doesn't have any known vulnerabilities. You can go ahead and either upgrade them or replace them. So if you know that workstations like old Dell Optiplexes or HP ProDesks, if they can't handle the new operating system, go ahead and get them off the network, spend the money and replace it if you can. The quicker the better, because the longer they're out there, the more likely they're known by outside sources, and you run the risk of being compromised. After doing that, you also want to make sure that no computer is just running ports or services on them that you don't know about, or if they're just running for no reason. You want to make sure that if a service is running, that it's the secure version of that service. Going back to Telnet, you want to use SSH instead. secure file transfer protocol, stuff like that, HTTPS instead of HTTP, things like that. And then what else kind of needs your attention? Routers and switches are a big concern. They're usually the ones that get forgotten in networks because they just run nonstop and you kind of take them for granted. Those will get vulnerable to attacks as well. They're not foolproof. They're by any means. You want to make sure that the iOS or OS on them is constantly up to date on the golden image or whatever the vendor recommends. I know Cisco calls it a golden image or golden operating system version. Keep them up to date. The reason they get neglected a lot of times is because getting them updated will require a downtime of some sort. So you might want to work around the end users or outside of business hours and see if you can upgrade them real quick. If you're not comfortable with them, you can always try to reach out to a vendor. Those are always good options. You also want to try to keep them replaced where they are still being supported by the vendor. You don't want to have a router or switch that's outdated and completely vulnerable, not receiving any updates, because that can lead to incidents or problems later down the road. So servers is another thing that kind of gets forgotten because people have that fear factor of, if I update my server, what does it break? And in some sense, that can be a case, but it definitely helps if like the servers are VMs on your environment, because you can always use a snapshot or roll them back into your and make sure that you can undo all the changes. And if something were to happen, you can always go back and not worry about the update, and then figure out the problems that you had, address them, and then go down the road and try to update them again or migrate them off of that server. Firewalls are a pretty big concern. They're, along with routers and switches, often forgotten about. They kind of run without being too finely tuned. If they haven't been updated for a while, they kind of lose the security aspect. They will they go off of a database, so they'll look for known patterns or known packages that are malicious and use those kind of means to detect and prevent infections or malware intrusions. So keeping that database up to date will definitely help out keeping those unwanted programs on your network. They also can be updated just as frequently. If something were to happen, I would definitely recommend making backups and stuff and making sure that all those access controls and policies that you have set on that firewall, that they get backed up prior to doing the upgrade. And being familiar with the device will also help. If you're not familiar with them, I definitely would do my research prior to, or reach out to a vendor or some form of third party if the firewall was installed by a third party. Then lastly, software. This goes for like web applications, web servers, antivirus, Microsoft Office, any of those sorts. They pose a threat just as much as your operating system, maybe even more. So Malwarebytes is an example of an antivirus. It goes off of the same thing like firewalls. They have a database, and if that's not updated, it'll often lead to malware sitting on your device and you have no idea that it's there. A lot of people get the blind notation that since they have antivirus, even though it's outdated a couple years, that they're completely safe from attacks, which is definitely not the case. Even when you have an up-to-date antivirus, you're not fully protected from every single thing. Microsoft Office, you want to keep that updated. Only use the certain applications that are still supported by vendors and receiving updates, because if not, there might be a vulnerability out there sitting on your network just waiting to be compromised by like a disgruntled employee or a known attacker or something of the sorts. So definitely keep all those things updated. and definitely take your time, think things through, use and abuse backups if you have to. Don't worry too much about breaking things, and it just kind of comes with getting to know your network more. As long as you can roll back or prevent data loss, that is the big concern, because you don't want to take the entire network down. You don't want to, destroy a server. So having a backup would bring it back up in a timely fashion, and it would also save your butt in the long run. And that's kind of all I got.
Well, I think what's really great about this is what occurred to me when I was like, hey, Trey, you know that you can do System Center Operations Manager. It did dawn on me, because it hit me immediately, that you're doing this for small business. So when possible, you're trying to go ahead and let them know about some of the free tools that are out there, or the cheaper tools. So, and I'm like, yeah, you can pay $2,500 for this product. Yeah, I did forget for a second. Oh yeah, we're talking about small businesses. That's typically not in their budget for technology. So yeah, that makes more sense there in that wheelhouse.
It kind of just depends on what you are willing to spend in your environment. The smaller the business, the more likely you're not going to want to spend on security appliances and stuff. You want to, go the cheap route, or the cost saving way. Some things are bundled in. So like if you buy a firewall, you might have a web filter built in. And the firewalls work as routers. So if you're a small business that only needs one router or one firewall, then you can get the all-in-one device and go for it. Some of them even have the wireless access point built in. So there's a couple things that you can do to consolidate costs. You can also use and abuse open source items. So a lot of applications that are open source, depending on what the terms and conditions that are outlined, you can kind of use those in your environment to make up for the difference.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just know that small businesses, lots of times, $2,500 for them may potentially go towards something that makes the business run. And I know that security is super important, because in theory, a hacker can make it to where your business doesn't run at all. But also I would assume they have to kind of like weigh the pros and cons and the, the net income revenue they've got to go ahead and figure out what they should be doing out there. I think really the biggest takeaway in general is you need to have an idea of what's on your network. You need to have an idea of what ports are out there on your network that are open. You need to know a baseline, because I always equate it in class to going to the doctor and getting the physical. If something is up and you think you're being attacked, or something goes wrong and you think something's out of the ordinary, if you don't have a normal, if you don't have the quote unquote normal to look back on, you have no idea whether you are currently abnormal. So if you don't have those configurations in place, you don't really know. So it is important. I know for small businesses, they probably have very, very little manpower, that type of thing. And so it seems like a lot of time to devote. But it's very, very important that you have an idea, a very good idea of what your network looks like, the topology that you've got out there, how it's all laid out. Because as Trey said, if something goes wrong, it would be great to already have a map that you can look at and go, okay, this just failed. What else does it affect? And that's prep work. You got to have that prep work to be able to do that. The same way that people do fire drills, because they want to make sure there was a real fire. You don't have people running around in circles not knowing where to go. It is important prep work to have for your business. And it does pay off, because if you don't have that, potentially you don't have a business anymore if something catastrophic happens.
Well, not only that, but I had a student one time who had gone in, he went to work for a newspaper, and the newspaper had basically just, taken an axe and completely cleared out the IT department. And they hired him as the IT department. And so he came in, he said, I don't even know where a lot of these devices are located. I don't know any usernames and passwords. I don't have any of that information. And so for him to come in completely cold, my old boss at the computer store would always be saying to us, what are we going to do if you get hit by a bus? That was her big thing. What, did you write this down? Do we know if somebody has to come behind you, And that guy, I felt really sorry for him because he really had to go through some detective work to try to figure out where all the devices were, the switches, the routers that were on the network. And then, really, the only thing he could do was try to go through password recovery. So he got really good at that on a Cisco device.
Yeah, when I worked at a managed service provider, you have a lot of different people looking at different IT setups or different networks that are unfamiliar to you by default. It's nice to have topologies to outline exactly how it's set up, because not every company is going to set it up exactly the same way. Pretty much all the time, you're going to have something completely different than the next network you run into. So, especially with other IT administrators working on it in a managed service provider realm, it's really easy for a document to get outdated, or they go and swap out a firewall or an access point, and then you go in behind them and it's completely different. And another way is just running into other people's band-aids. If they don't document it, then it could be a problem later down the road.
Yep.
Yep, I completely agree. You need to make sure you have a handle on your change management, because that goes back to me harping on the fact that, like, I think things are abnormal here. Well, what's changed? And if we haven't documented it, you can't say things were fine last week, now they're not, because you don't know what actually got documented and what happened there. So it helps you be more informed and get things done faster. The faster you can put out a fire, hopefully the idea is the less damage you're going to have. I'm being metaphorical there, but when you have a catastrophe of some sort, the faster you can look at, document, or diagnose and figure out the problem is, hopefully the more you can mitigate it spreading.
Yeah, and very often users have a really good feeling for the fact that the network is really slow. You get that call, network's really slow today, or you can feel it yourself. But then where do you start looking? And that's really where that baseline comes in, because then you can go ahead and take some data readings on the things that you baselined, and very quickly something will show up. It'll spike and it'll say, "Whoa, that is abnormal. We need to take a look at this disk subsystem that's about to fail," or something like that. And so having an idea of what things look like when everything was okay is a huge tool to use.
Yeah, and going back onto change management and stuff like that, that's kind of the whole point of having a ticketing system. I mean, it's a pain to put in tickets, a pain to update them, but it will also help you outline not just incidents, but known problems, reoccurring issues. So if a computer is constantly going down, but you don't log a ticket about it, that could possibly you would say it's running slow, fix it and move on. And you can't really see that maybe the hardware is failing. Maybe the end user is doing something that they don't know that is an issue, but you're not there for the issue. So it might need some training to correct that kind of action.
You can't find a pattern if it hasn't been documented.
That's true.
Very true. Thank you very much, Trey. Excellent presentation. See you tomorrow morning to go ahead and start off the advanced side for small businesses. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.